Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Chad Stotler. I'm a local history librarian here at Westlake Porter Public Library. And tonight we are having a little bit of a detour from our usual World at War Forum fair. And we'll be talking about the Sultana, the America's deadliest maritime disaster, and then researching members of the Ohio 103rd OVI during the American Civil War. On your chair, you should have found a program survey. At the end of the night, if you could fill that out and return that to me or let it on the table in the back, that would be great. That helps us know how we're doing. If you have any questions or ideas for programs, we also take that into account. For upcoming programs, December and January, we will be finally rounding out our series on Guadalcanal, and then in the new year we'll be starting in with more programming on the Second World War. But tonight it is my pleasure to welcome Dave Ressler. He is the College Credit Plus and History Day Coordinator for Lutheran West, and he will be talking about the Ohio 103rd. And then we have Myra Palomeque. She's a junior at Lutheran West, and she did the display for History Day on the Sultana. And you said she came in third?
Third in the state.
Third in the state, so. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and hear what he has to say about the Ohio 103rd. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. I will be sharing my use of a web-based program called WikiTree, and specifically a U.S. Civil War project, which is part of WikiTree, and my work with the 103rd Volunteer Infantry. I'll be sharing stories of members of the 103rd that I've been able to research, put up their profiles, and then share it with you, and what I try and do is share it with the world through WikiTree. Gotta turn this on first. So the U.S. Civil War Project on WikiTree has a mission statement and has over 60 different sub-projects, including the 103rd OVI, and people that are members of WikiTree can work on these. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Some of the other examples that are projects are Drummer Boys, Civil War Letters, Lincoln's Speeches and Proclamations, Civil War Train Wrecks, Nurses, and Sutlers. I plan on starting one on the Sultana disaster, thanks to being inspired by Myra and her project last year, and covering the survivors and those who did not survive the Sultana, and trying to make profiles of them and get their story out there as well. In the picture, you should recognize Soldiers and Sailors Monument. There in particular, that is portraying the Battle of Resaca and the 103rd Color Guard, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to one of the members of the 103rd. When you join WikiTree, you can choose different projects to work on, and then you get a badge, like you see the one up there, Project Member U.S. Civil War, and you are able to post that on your profile, stickers on your profile, like a Civil War sticker there. And the main goals of the U.S. Civil War Project are listed up here. Working on your own ancestor is usually how most people get started. You're tracing your family tree back, and then you discover something, right? And so it may lead you to one of the other projects. In this case, it led me to the U.S. Civil War Project. The month of October, well, I should say this, just about every month there is a challenge that the U.S. Civil War Project does. And in the month of October, they picked out the 103rd to be their challenge. At that point, when I found out about it in September, I had about 600, just over 600 profiles created of the members of the 103rd, which have over 1,000, just over 1,000 members. We are now at the end of this, that month, October 31st, we hit 860. And so other people hopped on board, helped me to finish up. We concentrated on a couple of regiments, companies H, I, and K, and I had been going alphabetically, basically. And so they were helping me with that. And one of the stories I'll tell you tonight, I didn't know about until someone from New York did the profile on these two brothers that were in the 103rd. And so that was kind of interesting to see. And it's neat about WikiTree, their major goal is to make one world tree. We're all related, you know, and everybody's on there. And right now there's over 41 million profiles that have been created on WikiTree. So it's pretty cool, and to do your part. I've been doing genealogy for about 40 years. I was inspired by my grandmother, who would tell me stories, and then one of them was of a Needham family and the Chapman family, and we have American Revolutionary War soldiers in there, and then she would show me her DAR certificate, which I still have to this day, where she would, I believe it was 1946, when she became a member of the DAR. And when I went to Kent State, yeah, go and flashes. So when I went to Kent State, I started really doing more research, and actually that's where my grandmother was from, Kent. And so was able to see the house she grew up in and so forth, and find some more, and I've never stopped. And it's just a fun hobby to do. I also have my students do it as well. So we end the year with a family history project with that. So let's get into the 103rd. So my focus as a member of the U.S. Civil War Project on the 103rd was because of my first cousin, and that's him up here, Harlan Page Chapman. So I knew of the Chapman line, and then when I discovered Harlan, another student of mine connected me to the 103rd. He basically, I was telling him about it, we had lunch, he said, I have a book for you. And so we met, and he gave me this book to read, his copy of it, Personal Reminiscences and Experiences of the Members of the 103rd. And lo and behold, Harlan Page Chapman wrote 7 chapters of this book about his experiences. And so I began to dive deeper into that and created his WikiTree profile, which you can see parts of it up there. So I got connected then with Deb Wagner, who's the museum curator of the 103rd Memorial Foundation Museum, and I just wanted to help them tell their story because it's such an awesome story. And so that's when I asked, hey, would it be okay if I start making profiles of the 103rd and get your help to do so? Also want to point out Bill Stark, who really helped me as well as a member of the 103rd and Daughters and Sons of the 103rd. And he wrote his master's thesis on the 103rd. And I was able to get that and really help me to develop these profiles as well. So a little bit about Harlan. He served in Company H of the 103rd, was wounded on November 25th, 1863 at the Battle of Armstrong's Hill. He was shot in the leg and a bullet lodged in his hip. They never took the bullet out. He was in the hospital for 62 days and then returned to his home in Eaton Township. He was a prominent farmer, established a grocery store in LaPorte, and served as postmaster of LaPorte as well. He had 53 acres of farmland and built his house in 1884, known as the Hedges. He also served as treasurer of Lorain County from 1893 to 1897. Harlan contributed, as I mentioned, 7 chapters in the book. One of the chapters was titled Forage, Fun, and Hunger. The homestead stayed in the Chapman family until the 1970s, and the Chapman family has contributed a lot of items to the OVI Museum. Just 2 months ago, I met 5 more of my Chapman cousins when they donated another Chapman, Emery's, that served in the 103rd, his jacket, a bullet that he got shot with in his hand, and his enlistment papers and muster out papers, discharge papers as well. So that was really cool to meet some more Chapman cousins. The house here, it still stands there, Grafton Road and Route 10. The highway took most of the Chapman's land there that went through, but that house is still there and was renovated back to try and look like it did back in the 1880s when Harlan built it. As I mentioned, Chapman family has a long history of service in the military. My 5th great-grandfather, Constant Chapman, served in the 6th Connecticut in the Continental Army. There were 4 Chapmans that served in the 103rd, 1 that served in the 124th, and 1 that served in the 23rd OVI, and he was unfortunately killed at Antietam. This tradition of service continued throughout all the way to the Vietnam War. William served in Company H and rose to the rank of 2nd Lieutenant. He had a set of journals, which are now housed at Bowling Green State University. And I want to read a little excerpt from that journal. He said, "Have just received a letter from Father bringing the sad intelligence that the Grass Chapman has died of wounds received in the terrible Battle of Sharpsburg, and that Mr. Durkee has gone to get his body, together with that of his son, killed in the same engagement. Harlan is overwhelmed with grief at the news. Verily, we have fallen on dark days of sorrow, but there is divinity that shapes our ends. To die for one's country is an honor which increases with advancing years and a rich legacy to leave to our children's children." William went on to be a school teacher and a farmer in Henry County. Emery Chapman, as I mentioned, also served in the 103rd. He was in Company E. He was wounded at the Battle of Resaca on May 14, 1864. He and his brother William then moved down to Henry County, and unfortunately he was tragically killed on the farm when a tree that him and his neighbor were cutting down came the wrong way and killed him. Going back to the earlier slide of Soldiers and Sailors Monument, I want to take you to probably the most famous member of the 103rd, and that's Levi Schofield. Levi was born in 1842 in Cleveland, Ohio. He studied architecture under his father. On July 16, 1862, he enlisted with Company E of the 103rd as a 2nd lieutenant. He was promoted to 1st lieutenant on the 9th of February, 1863. He then was transferred to Company F and promoted to captain in November of 1864. He mustered out with the company on June 12, 1865. During his infantry service, his engineering abilities were appreciated by his superior officers, and he was frequently assigned to do engineering work. After the war, he worked in New York and then returned to Cleveland and began to work as an architect. Levi's work includes institutional buildings, private residences, and public art. His most notable works include insane asylums in Athens in 1868, Columbus in 1869, the North Carolina State Penitentiary in 1870, the Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield. You might recognize that one from the movie Shawshank Redemption, right? The backdrop of that 1994 film. His firm also designed 5 Cleveland public schools, including Central High School in 1878. In 1901, Levi designed a 14-story structure on the southwest corner of East 9th Street and Euclid Avenue. Completed in 1902, the Schofield Building with an H. The they added the H to that. Served as headquarters for his architectural firm. Schofield building went through a 5-year restoration and is now known as the Kimpton Schofield Hotel and Schofield Residency. I found a biography of his wife and a little excerpt from this on Captain Schofield. It says, perhaps the most celebrated work which Captain Schofield has designed is the Cuyahoga County Soldiers and Sailors Monument, which stands in Public Square in Cleveland, and of which he was both architect and sculptor. This monument was built in 1894 when it was dedicated. The principal address was given by William McKinley, at the time governor of Ohio. It is stated that the procession which formed the parade on that occasion was the most impressive and largest ever seen on the streets of Cleveland. The total cost of the monument was $314,500, of which $257,000 was paid by the county and $57,000 was contributed by Captain Schofield himself. I had the privilege to be invited by members of the 103rd just a few weeks ago to get a private tour of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, and Greg Palumbo did a fantastic job. It was about a 2-hour tour, and we got to go even underneath into the tunnels. If you ever get a chance to do that, it was fascinating, and they do a great job downtown just explaining everything. I learned so much in that time period as well. Maybe the next most prominent person of the 103rd is John Stephen Casement. John was born in Geneva, New York in 1829. He was one of 5 children of immigrant parents from the Isle of Man. The family moved to Michigan in 1844, and he began working at a railroad company as a water boy for track laying gangs. John then worked on the road gangs and eventually became a foreman, and then moved to Northern Ohio in 1850 to work on the Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati Railroad. In 1853, he started his own business and contracted to grade the roadbed of the Lake Shore Railroad. He then married Frances Marion Jennings in 1857. When the Civil War broke out, he accepted a commission as a major in the 7th OVI. He resigned in May due to his wife wanting him home and his disillusionment with officers of the 7th Regiment who were in the Army to serve their own political agendas. In April of 1862, he received a leave of absence to regain his strength after suffering from fever and backaches. And then in July of 1862, he was unanimously chosen as Colonel of the 103rd OVI by the 11th Military District Committee. In mid-August, Colonel Casement, attending a war meeting in Medina, gave a short talk to the recruits at a city park, and the Medina Gazette wrote that under Colonel Casement's direction, the 103rd would prove itself second to none in regiment in the field. The first action of the 103rd under Colonel Casement was to repel the Confederate invasion of Kentucky. He had about 50 men who were part of the picket line for the brigade were captured by the Confederate cavalry, and this prompted Colonel Casement to lecture the regiment on being alert during picket duty. He used profanity during the lecture, which prompted the chaplain, Chaplain Hubbard, to speak to him about the use of profanity. Colonel Casement replied, "Chaplain, the probability is that you will keep right on praying, and the probability is I will keep on swearing." And the probability also is that in a very short time, the boys will learn that neither of us give a damn about what we say. By mid-October, the Confederates had left Kentucky, and the 103rd was assigned the task of occupying Kentucky. Most of these months were spent in and around Frankfort. He addressed the men at that time and talking about a visit they were getting from J.J. Crittenden, the author of the Crittenden Compromise. In 1862, in December, he fell ill with typhoid fever. While at the General Court-Martial trial of Colonel Doolittle in Lexington, he would return to the regiment later on, he would return to Cleveland and then recover and return to the regiment later on. The 103rd was on the move from August March to August 1863, encasement had the men march for 45 minutes, then rest 15 minutes, then march 45 minutes, and that allowed his regiment to handle the marches very well. He spent part of these months court-martial duty and was absent from the regiment. Colonel Sterling was in charge of the regiment in his absence. In September of 1863, he wrote to his wife about his frustration with the orders of marching forward and then retreating multiple times. He said, "I started on fight and had the enemy badly scared, but was stopped so the enemy got away without a thrashing. And now we're full of spunk with all the force they had at that time, with some additions that we are now reduced to less than half of what we had." The Battle of Blue Springs, Tennessee, would be the regiment's first significant engagement with the enemy. Colonel Casement had sent 2 companies of the 103rd out in front, and he mounted his favorite horse, Old Rover, and set up the skirmish line. The Confederates retreated during the night, and after the Battle of Blue Springs, the regiment marched on to Knoxville and became part of the siege of Knoxville by the Army of Ohio. Colonel Casement gained his first experience commanding a brigade when he was assigned the Provisional Brigade, made up of unorganized regiments around Knoxville. He's in and out of sickness, and then on June 4th, 1864, Colonel Casement resumes command of the 103rd during General Sherman's Atlanta campaign. Under his command, the 103rd was the first regiment to cross the Chattahoochee River on July 8th, 1864, concluding the first phase of the Atlanta campaign. We're going to hear a little bit more about that from some other members of the 103rd. Casement was promoted to the permanent command of the 2nd Brigade, which he held until the end of the war. And the 2nd Brigade became the first unit to secure a section of the Macon and Western Railroad on Sherman's entire front at about 3 p.m. on August 31st, 1864. This forced the evacuation of Atlanta by Hood, and General Jacob Cox recommended Colonel Casement's advancement to the rank of Brigadier General, stating, "long, meritorious, and faithful service." The Casement's 2nd Brigade was at the center of the Union line at the Battle of Franklin, and the Confederate General John Bell Hood's Army of Tennessee conducted numerous frontal assaults against fortified positions occupied by the Union forces under General Schofield, different Schofield. Hood's forces struck in the ditches in front of Casement's brigade. To the right of the Lewisburg Pike, General Cox credited Casement with, quote, "saving the day for the Union." He was appointed as Brigadier General, and his brigade moved on to the Carolina campaign, where he led his troops in the Battle of Wilmington. He then resigned his commission in April 1865, concluding his service in the Civil War. Afterward, he was hired to direct the construction of the first transcontinental railroad. John directed the construction crews, who referred to him as General Jack. John and his brother Dan used their own money to help fund the project. To make money on the side, John took grading work and opened general stores in towns along the route. Under the Casements, the work was completed in record time on May 10th, 1869. In July 1870, John was hired to reconstruct the Union and Titusville Railroad to standard gauge, and he also constructed the Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, New York, and Central America constructed track there. One side story with the Transcontinental Railroad, we don't have any proof of this, but the story has been told that he actually is the one who drove in the golden spike because the politicians couldn't pick up the sledgehammer to be able to do it. They weren't strong enough, and the boys cheered General Jack on to do it. We don't have a confirmation of that, but that's the legend that he did that. In 1870, his stepfather, Charles Clement Jennings, built the Casement House at Jennings Place for John and Frances. That is up there. It is now part of the National Registry. There is a company that owns it. It's I think it's a cement company out in Painesville. I've been out there. Actually, I took those pictures. It's a really cool site. Overlooks the Grand River. Sits up way up on a hill. It's a pretty magnificent home, and it now has been saved by the National Register as well. A lot on those two guys. The other people will go a little bit faster with. Thomas Brannigan. Captain Thomas Brannigan was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1847, and when he was 2 years of age, he was brought to the United States with his family, and they established a home in Ohio. He was educated in public schools in Ohio, where he spent his early youth. In 1862, at the extremely early age of 14 years, he enlisted in Company I of the 103rd. Yeah, 14 years old when he enlisted. He participated in the Siege of Knoxville under Burnside, in the Battle of Armstrong's Hill, and many engagements in eastern Tennessee. In May of 1864, the Army of Ohio joined Sherman near Atlanta, and on May 14, 1864, the brigade to which he belonged made the charge at Resaca and took the first line of works in the fierce fight which ensued. He was wounded at Resaca, but continued with the command and was in many engagements during the advance upon Atlanta. Captain Brannigan was the first man of Sherman's army to cross the Chattahoochee River in front of Atlanta, and thus led the way across the historic stream. The hazardous feat was accomplished in the face of almost insurmountable difficulties, and after the failure of a detachment of troops from Colonel Cameron's brigade to effect the crossing of the wide and rapidly flowing stream. The thunder of rebel battery concealed about 1,000 yards down the river, and the possibility of unknown foes on the opposite bank only spurred this boy of only 16 years of age to greater effort. He struck boldly into the water. Upon reaching the opposite shore, finding the field clear, signaled Colonel Casement, whereupon he was quickly followed by his own company under Captain George Redway, and then by the 103rd Ohio, and eventually the whole 23rd Corps was thrown across on pontoons. According to the diary of Captain George Redway, this occurred on July 8, 1864. In recognition of this service, the boy was made corporal. After the close of hostilities, he was mustered out, and then being of only 17 years of age, yet on the battle, he displayed valor and loyalty equal to that of many veterans twice his age. After the war, he entered Mennonite College in Wadsworth, and then he went west. He was a miner, a driver on a stagecoach line, a bridge builder for railroad companies, a captain of Indian police, a detective, and then finally settled down as a fruit and alfalfa farmer and a mine owner. So he settles out, and I have this picture up here of this library. You can't see it on there, but it's named after him in Las Cruces. And this was the first library, was a collection of 500 books that the Women's Improvement Association kept at various members of homes, and then in a small office they had on Water Street. In 1927, 33 years after the WIA was founded, the books were moved there, and then members took turns to act as librarians. One of the WIA members was Alice Brannigan, Thomas's wife. So along with her husband, Captain Thomas Brannigan, was active in the community, and then when Alice died in 1932, they had no children. She left her estate to various civic organizations and bequeathed, for those days, a considerable sum of money to the town of Lake Las Cruces for a public library to be named in honor of her late husband. So the Thomas Brannigan Memorial Library opened its doors to the public in November of 1935, and it's still there today. The other person I mentioned was George Redway, so we'll talk about him real quick. George enlisted in Company I of the 103rd on August 7th, 1862. He was detailed to Company K in 1864, and then promoted to captain of the Company of I, so he went back to Company I, in May of 1864. So he wrote about this crossing of the Chattahoochee River, and he said this: "These 16 men waded in single file, carrying arms and ammunition above their heads, walking on a sort of fish dam, the sort of which was over 5 feet underwater part of the way. A few slipped and fell in, but were quickly helped up and on. As soon as we reached the south bank of the Chattahoochee, we deployed as skirmishers. The rest of the brigade followed in the pontoons, which rapidly slipped into the creek that emptied into the river at that point." After the war, he became clerk in the U.S. Land Office in Washington, D.C. The Cook brothers. So I grew up in North Olmsted on Bellevue Drive, which is off of Fitch Road, almost to Olmsted Falls. So we were the last street in North Olmsted, and went down Cook Road all the time and always wondered why it was called Cook Road. Now I know. These guys. The Cook brothers came to Olmsted Township with their father Caleb in 1834. They established farms and helped their father cut a road that became Cook Road. They also cut Fitch Road with John and James Fitch, and part of Stearns Road as well. That whole area was all farms of the Fitches and the Cooks, basically. So if you know your geography from Fitch Road to Stearns, that's a lot of acreage there. He enlisted in, Andrew enlisted in Company B of the 103rd at age 25. 4 days later, Caleb and William enlisted at ages 43 and 33. Andrew was transferred to the 120th, 2nd Battalion Veteran Reserve Corps. Caleb and William stayed the whole time with Company B and mustered out in June of 1865. All of the sons were farmers. Caleb stayed in Olmsted Township on Cook Road. He named one of his sons Aldous after another soldier from Company B, Aldous Cody. And some of the Cook family houses are still standing on Cook Road. So that was, there's a really cool article too that Deb was part of helping out with. When Olmsted Falls was doing an anniversary, and they were of the town, and I don't know what year it was or what, if it was 150, what it was, but they were able to put some pictures together, and you can see the rifle that Caleb Cook used during the Civil War there as well. Michael was born in 1837 in Canada, immigrated with his parents in 1844 to Cleveland. He enlisted in Company A of the 103rd. He was appointed first sergeant. He was promoted to first lieutenant in 1865, and he mustered out with the company in June. Michael was granted land in Michigan through the Homestead Act of 1862, and he went with a friend from Company A, John McKean, who was also granted land in Michigan on the same day. They were farmers, and he served to kind of one of the founders of Pleasantown Township and served as their treasurer. He contributed one chapter called Notes from a Company A Man to the regimental book. And he was also granted then 160 acres, John was granted 160 acres in Manistee, Michigan, later on in the Homestead Act, and they cleared and worked the land and stayed there as farmers, and were kind of seen as founders of these towns. There's actually a book written about it, and they're listed in that book. John Mountain. John enlisted as a musician in Company H and then promoted to Fife Major of Field and Staff. After the war, he was a prominent businessman in Elyria. He owned a popular tailor shop, but he had a very tragic story that happens with him. So he went on a bike ride from Elyria to Lorraine, and then he was coming back from Lorraine, and a storm was coming, and so he hurried as fast as he could go and to beat the storm, and he arrived at his house, and he was out of breath and extremely fatigued and distressed, and he ate a lot of ice cream and tried to cool himself down, and everything seemed to be fine, and they went to bed, and then about midnight he woke up his wife and said he was too hot and he was overheated again, and why isn't the window open? And she went and opened the window and went back to bed, and then a few minutes later she heard a big thud. and she ran out and saw that the window was open and her husband was nowhere to be found. He was on the ground. They were up in the second story, and he had fallen out of the window and was in an unconscious state. She called for a doctor. She probably screamed, and a neighbor doctor came by, and Mr. Sands, a neighbor, responded. They brought him in, and they determined that he had accidentally stepped out of the open window. The article in the Elyria paper said that he was at home and recovering, that he was unconscious for a while, but that he was a weak condition, but he recovered consciousness, that he was 58 years old and an unusually robust man, maybe all the ice cream, right? The shock was a severe one, and for a time his condition was critical. The next article, he passed away 2 weeks later. So they said he was on a fair way of recovery. He passed away August 11th, 1893. The funeral was very large. He was a very prominent businessman. He was like, the tailor shop, from what I read in other articles, was like the place where everybody hung out. That's what he did. He was a great guy. He hung out there, and at that time in Elyria, and everybody knew him. So it was a big funeral for him. I want to touch on Andy Parsons. Andy was the drummer boy of the 103rd, and also enlisted at age 14. He kept a diary during the war. The original diary is housed at Lake County History Center, but a copy of it is at the 103rd OVI Museum, along with the picture you see here on the left, his drum that was given to him at the end of the war, ceremonial drum and sticks. They are there as well. Hand-painted silver shield commemorates the engagements of the 103rd. Another picture that's hanging up at the 103rd is of the regimental band and Lookout Mountain, and then the other picture is a picture of the copy of his diary. And you can actually go up to the second floor of the museum. You can page through the diary there and see it. I guess I skipped one. Let's see. Nope. All right. Mine might be out of order here. I got James Sterling. James was born in 1834 in Cleveland. James graduated from Kenyon College. And then at the breakout of the Civil War, he enlisted as a lieutenant in the 7th OVI. And then he was made captain of Company B of the 7th OVI. He later became lieutenant colonel of the 103rd. Maybe he left for the same reasons the other gentleman had left as well with the 7th OVI, caseman. And then he was made Inspector General of the staff of General Samuel Carter. And then in September 1863, he became Inspector General of the staff of General J.D. Cox. He resigned in 1864, moved back to Cleveland. He was brevetted colonel for gallant and meritorious service, and then resumed his work for the Cuyahoga Steam Furnace Company after the war. He also worked as a purchasing agent, paymaster, and civil engineer for railroads, and finished out his career as the general manager for the Ohio Coal Company. I want to point out, too, as we go through these, if you notice, what I did was I took some shots from their profiles, and I'm related to a bunch of these guys. So that's one of the other things you see in WikiTree is as you put yours in and you get connected with the One World Tree, you can see who you're related to. I have one student in here, so a little spoiler alert for him, up to a couple students back there. When we get to our family history, I put up a slide that shows that my wife and I are cousins as well. And they always go, what? I'm like, 10th cousins, all right? So, but that's kind of a cool thing. Also, by the way, Taylor Swift. My daughter loved that we were cousins to Taylor Swift. That was, huge Swiftie, so something like 7th or 10th cousins as well. All right, moving on. Philip was born in 1833. His family moved to Illinois during his infancy, and he was raised on a family farm. He attended and graduated from Oberlin College, and so that's where the connection is going to be with the 103rd. He enlisted in Company F and was commissioned as a captain of the 103rd. He was promoted as lieutenant colonel, and then in 1864, in 1867, President Andrew Johnson nominated Hayes for appointment to the grade of Brevet Brigadier General of Volunteers, and the United States Senate confirmed the appointment. After the war, he returned to Ohio and was superintendent of Mount Vernon schools. In 1872, he published a history of the 103rd. That was my bedtime reading for the last I don't know, a couple weeks or so. It's online. You can see the whole, what his version of the 103rd was that he wrote in 1872. So that's free online. He then moved on to Illinois in 1874, was elected as a Republican to the 45th United States Congress. In 1876, he was re-elected, and he did not run in 1880, moved to Joliet, Illinois, worked in journalism, and he contributed 4 chapters to the Reminiscence book. Luther was a teacher and a doctor in Massachusetts. He married in Elyria in 1835 and had a practice in Elyria and later Grafton. In 1844, the Cleveland Medical College conferred on him the honorary degree of MD. In 1856, he was appointed by Governor Chase as a trustee of the Northern Ohio Lunatic Asylum. And then in 1860, he was reappointed to the same office by Governor Dennison, and he held that position for 10 years. He will join in on the 130, he gets appointed, but I want to skip ahead to some things that he talks about and when he writes about. He says, the Battle of Armstrong's Hill was fought on the 27th of November, I think it's the 25th actually, but in which 103rd bore a conspicuous part. The rebel assault was repulsed with great loss to them. The 103rd lost in that regiment 2 killed, 32 wounded, and many who died of their wounds. Surgeon Griswold made temporary dressings of their wounds as they were brought in, treating Union and rebel soldiers alike, and sent them in ambulances to a new hospital in the city. He visited the hospital the next day and found the wounded lying on the floor in their bloody clothing without even blankets to cover them. He proposed at once to take charge of his own men, and soon after was appointed surgeon in charge of the hospital. He soon procured through the quartermaster a supply of wooden bunks, and the Union ladies of Knoxville a quantity of bed ticks. He also secured a load of straw and blankets, and the poor wounded soldiers had comfortable beds. He was appointed surgeon in charge of Hospital Number 4, which contained 500 patients, and for a time he had charge of 2 hospitals containing 800 sick and wounded soldiers. So some of the things that were written about him. He does talk a little bit about that Chattahoochee River as well. At length, after crossing the Chattahoochee River, having arrived within 8 miles of Atlanta, the objective point of the campaign, Dr. Griswold found himself so reduced in strength by the disease and fatigue of the camp of the field that he reluctantly resigned his position in the Army and returned home. After regaining his health, he again entered into practice of his profession. He would actually also serve in the Ohio Senate in 1865 and be re-elected in 1867, and continue with actually a practice of as a physician and as a lawyer as well. Very accomplished man. One of his items is in the museum there on the right at the 103rd as well. These 2 guys were 2 that I mentioned at the beginning that the guy from New York came across and was in the October Challenge, so this discovery. Thomas enlisted in Company H of the 103rd. At age 20, his older brother Benjamin enlisted 2 days later. Probably the mother told him to look after his brother. That happened a lot. Thomas married 2 days before reporting to Camp Cleveland. Both men were at the hospital in Frankfort, Kentucky in February of 1863. Thomas died of typhoid at the hospital. Benjamin survived the war and married a nurse from the hospital at Frankfort, possibly the nurse that aided his brother during that time period. As I mentioned, these profiles were made of in October by Andrew Simpier, who worked on the Glorious 106, New York. He's from New York, and that's what he worked on. Basically, one of the things he posted that after discovering this, he said, if the men didn't go to that hospital that day, he would have never have met his wife. One lived, one died in a future of promise. George was born in 1831, enlisted in 1862, was appointed as chaplain in 1862. He resigned in 1864. He was a Baptist minister, a farmer, an attorney, and a postmaster. Passed away in 1904. This is an excerpt. He is actually listed in the history of Cuyahoga County and city of Cleveland, and this excerpt comes from that. He says, he was a man of unusual gifts and lived a life of service and experience. In early years, he was a Baptist minister, and during the Civil War, he was chaplain of the 103rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. Subsequently, he became a practicing lawyer at Berea and was for a number of years postmaster of that city and served in the Ohio State Legislature. Franklin was born in 1841. He enlisted in Company I as a corporal. His rank was changed to private in November at his own request. He mustered out with the company at the end, and he wrote the chapter Notes from an Army Blacksmith in the book. And here's an excerpt from it. He says, in November of '62, I was detailed as a regimental blacksmith, and much of the time there, 3 years, was spent shaking hands with mules. We shod them in all positions except on the wing, some on their backs with feet tied together, and some suspended in slings with all 4 feet raised from the ground. If, when we marched into a town, we were able to take possession of a blacksmith shop, we were fortunate. If not, we shod them without shelter, often standing in snow to our knees. He moved on to New London after the war, was a blacksmith there, moved back to Medina in 1875, and actually was granted a patent by the U.S. Patent Office for eaves trough hanger when he was living in Medina. All right, so Deb told me maybe not to tell this story because we want to tell all the good things of the 103rd. I came across something that didn't turn out so good for these 2 guys of the 103rd. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of these 2 guys. Andrew enlisted in Company E of the 103rd. He was mustered out in June, so he served the whole time, never wounded, never injured. His brother, Levi, also served in the Civil War in the 7th Ohio. Andrew was a woodcarver by trade and worked as a clerk at the Cleveland and Pittsburgh Railroad office in Cleveland. On February 23rd, 1869, Andrew married Jenny E. Norris, a Cleveland prostitute known as Tragedy Jenny. After a few months in their marriage, Jenny fled to Baltimore to continue what she was doing before with another known prostitute. Andrew retrieved her, and they made it to Pittsburgh, where Jenny said she wanted to live and promised she would stay. So he went back to Cleveland to put his arrangements together and then go back to Pittsburgh. Well, when returning to Pittsburgh, Jenny had disappeared again. He found her in April 1870 in Toledo and discovered in her sleeves a pair of buttons that he believed belonged to her paramour, and he shot her dead. Andrew pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, temporary insanity. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in state penitentiary. Andrew was diagnosed as insane and taken to the asylum in 1883 and passed away in 1884. Now, we're not done with this story yet, though. We got this other guy. Jay was born in 1846. He attended an academy in New York, and he was born to Dr. Christopher Bergen Galantine. And when he was 16, and he moved to his parents to Cleveland, Jay enlisted in Company E. Remember that, Company E, same one that Andrew did. On August 5th, he was, as a corporal, was reduced in rank in the next year, 1 year later, August. He was detained as duty as clerk in the subsistence department, and he was stationed at General Cox's headquarters until the end of the war. It is presumed he mustered out on June 12, 1865, with the 103rd. Jay advertised in the Cleveland Herald for correspondence in 1863. He took up his dad's occupation, that was a dentist, so he became a dentist. And then he took out an advertisement searching for ladies. And a Mary J. MacArthur was one of the ladies that responded to his advertisement. Jay married Mary Josephine MacArthur on August 22nd, 1865, at her father's residence in Parma. He was a dentist by trade, learning the trade from his father. And in 1870, he was accused of murdering Dr. Willis H. Jones, Mary's lover, and sentenced to 10 years of hard labor at the Ohio State Penitentiary. He is received there on Saturday, February 4th, 1871, files an application for pardon by the governor shortly after the trial concluded. He files for divorce in 1874, was issued a divorce in November of that year, and then somehow, I haven't found it yet, but he's not in jail. He gets out at some point. Maybe pardoned, we don't know. He had connections. He was a prominent Cleveland person, so was his dad. And so he gets the divorce finalized, marries again in 1875, and continues to work as a dentist until he passes away in 1913. The Cleveland Leader had this to say about these two gentlemen. The old proverb, birds of feather flock together, was strangely verified in this case of Dr. J. F. Galantine and Andrew J. Botter. They were intimate friends before the war, enlisted at the same time, fought in the same battles, mustered together, came to Cleveland. They both had trouble with their wives, both indicted for murder, found guilty of manslaughter, and soon will be together again in the penitentiary. Cleveland Leader, 1871. All right, I'm going to end with a happy note in this story. Wilbur M. Sturtevant never, so I gave this sort of same speech in Lorain counties, and it was all Lorain County people. So this person never lived in Lorain County, but had a connection through his wife and daughters to Oberlin through a very strange tale. He enlisted in Company D, rose to the rank of second lieutenant. After the war, he married and moved to Chagrin Falls and worked in Cleveland, but the close confinement of office work was making him ill. So he left his family in the spring of 1876 and headed to Leadville, Colorado, to regain his health and to prospect in the rich mining district. He wrote letters back to his family, but in 1881 the family stopped receiving the letters. After over a year of not receiving anything from Wilbur, the family hired a detective to find out, and the family received then a letter telling them to pay $10 and that the letters would then be sent to them. They did, and they got the letters which had been unopened and that the family had mailed to Wilbur. So they got their own letters back. They never got anything from Wilbur. It had been during that time that Wilbur had been swindled out of the rights to a mine and had items stolen from him. The postmaster was involved in the scheme, and that was the reason why he did not receive any correspondence from his family or they from him. Feeling abandoned by his family, he took off for California. And he ends up in California and builds trails in the Sierra Madre Mountains. And he is there, and then in 1888, Mrs. Sturtevant and her daughters had moved to Oberlin, and she worked as a dressmaker. Her daughters then began attending Oberlin College, And then news came to them that Wilbur was alive. A family friend was vacationing in California, in those mountains, on the trail, ran into Wilbur and said, "Aren't you Wilbur from Ohio?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Your wife's been looking for you for 20 years. And so correspondence continued. They were able to make the connection. They went out there. The family was reunited in 1896 in California. The Sturdivants made their home along the trail to Wilson's Peak. Wilbur was the superintendent of the Burro Trail, and he established Sturdivant Camp in 1893. The camp is still active to this day. What is also really neat is I got contacted when I made this profile by the president of Camp Sturdivant, and they were celebrating the 163rd birthday or something like that of Wilbur, and they came across it and said, "Hey, can we use the stuff that you got on your website for our celebration," and things like that. And so I've been in contact and got all these pictures from them. Wilbur is on the burro, and then this is Wilbur and his wife reunited. His daughter, actually, his one daughter, Myra, became very prominent. She actually has her own Wikipedia page, and she became famous as an author, and she retells the story, and it got published in kind of a tabloid-type magazine in England. She embellishes a lot on things. There's a lot of stuff in the story that the president of the Sturdivant camp said is not true. But you can look at the Cleveland papers and read about this story and see that the reunion was true. With that, a little bit longer, but I thank you for that. And I'm going to bring up Myra. She's got a fantastic story to tell you about the Sultana disaster.
Hello. I want to share with you guys a little bit about my National History Day project from this previous year, National History Day, which is on the Sultana, which is America's deadliest maritime disaster. Now, the story of the Sultana is a story of endings: the end of a war, the end of slavery, the death of a president, the end of suffering of those in captivity, and also, unfortunately, the end of many lives. And in April of 1861, the nation had gotten itself into the Civil War, turning state against state and neighbor against neighbor. Throughout the war, thousands of soldiers on both sides were captured. And for the Union, there were two destinations for those soldiers who were captured: Andersonville, Andersonville in Georgia, and Cabot Prison in Alabama. And these places were not great conditions. At the height of Andersonville's operation, around 33,000 men were held in an area that was only about 26.5 acres large. And at that point in the war, if it had been established as an actual city, it would have been the 5th largest city in the Confederacy. Now, of course, diseases ran rampant and quickly spread, rations dwindled, and malnutrition affected many. Men were dying everywhere. And from about February to October of 1864, over 10,000 lives were lost, and that was nearly a third of the camp's population. And by March of 1865, it was evident that the South was losing the war, so Cabot and Andersonville started to give up its occupants. They were moved to a parole camp called Camp Fisk in Vicksburg, Tennessee. And the men were happy to be out of the prison with the hope of heading home to see their families. And even though they were still prisoners, they were under the control of the Union Army. And April 9th, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The news would not reach the soldiers at Camp Fisk until April 13th, and to celebrate, they held a 100-gun salute together. Now, with the Southern rail lines in tatters from the war, all of these prisoners of war needed a way to get back home north, so it was decided that they would send them home through steamboat. Now, on April 13th, the steamboat that would carry most of the POWs was docked at St. Louis, preparing for its journey south. It was called the Sultana, and the Sultana was created for a total of 375 passengers and a crew of 80. And it was under the command of Captain J. Cass Mason. And he was a younger man. He was a bit of a daredevil. He even put these elk antlers on the top of his boat to show that he was like the fastest one out on the water. Now, during this time, steamboats were known to have pretty short lifespans, and they were often lost to accidents. The issue with these steamboats during the Civil War is that there were regulations put in place, but many of them were put aside to carry as many men and supplies as quickly as possible. And on April 15, 1865, the Sultana stopped in Cairo, Illinois, and arrived in Vicksburg, bringing news of President Lincoln's assassination that had just occurred the night before. And then the Sultana went to New Orleans to bring word of Lincoln's assassination. While there, it had a routine cleaning and scraping of its troublesome boilers. It arrived back in Vicksburg, and it was discovered that the metal larboard boiler had developed a leak. The chief engineer told Captain Mason that the boat could not depart without a repair, and Mason knew that if he got the boat repaired, it would cost him the soldier transport job. And Mason got a local boiler maker by the name of R.G. Taylor to take a look at it, and he said that it would take about a few days to completely repair the boiler. And if Mason knew that if he didn't leave the following day, he would not get a load of prisoners to take back. And the reason he wanted to get prisoners is because he wanted the money. The government was paying about $5 per enlisted man and $10 per officer to take them back home. So Captain Mason cuts a deal with Colonel Reuben Hatch, who was the chief quartermaster at Vicksburg. And Mason told him that he would pay him off to give him as many men as he could. And Captain Mason also tried to convince the Boilermaker, R.G. Taylor, to put a thin patch over the buckled area of the boiler to temporarily fix it. And initially Taylor refused, but for some reason he came back and agreed to put the thin patch over the boiler. And the two plates that were around the bulge in the boiler needed to be replaced, but they were not. Now, the prisoners of war started to get loaded onto the Sultana, and due to miscommunication of the officers in charge and the bribery going on, people thought that there were only about 1,400 men aboard the Sultana, but in reality, there were about 2,500 aboard. And remember, as I said earlier, the ship was only built for about 375 people and a crew of 80, so it was heavily overloaded. And Mason did not only wanted a large load of men, but he wanted all the remaining soldiers at Vicksburg. And even worse, there were two other boats docked at Vicksburg at the time, and they left with a total of 17 passengers altogether, so that many men did not make it to the Sultana. Eventually, the Sultana left on its voyage north, and the people on board started to hear clanking noises coming from the boiler. And the upper decks of the boat even started to sag because there were just so many people on it, as you can see in the picture there. There was very little room to lay down and sleep, and many of the men were sick. Even though the conditions were bad on the boat, they did not care because they were finally going home, and they were excited to see their families. There was the most people on board the boat that there ever was in the Mississippi River at one point at this time, so it was a large amount. The Sultana had to work hard against the flood current because the snow melted from up north really created a strong current, and they wanted to keep the Sultana going at its usual rate of 10 miles an hour, so they had the boiler working extra hard to fight against that current, which obviously put more strain on it because it needed to be repaired. Now, the Sultana stopped in Memphis to unload some cargo and continued on. And about 2 a.m. in the morning, on April 27, 1865, 3 out of the 4 boilers on the Sultana exploded. Confusion and panic filled all the soldiers. The entire center of the boat was destroyed, almost like a volcano. And most of the soldiers who were sick were placed around the boiler because that was where it was the warmest, and they were killed instantly. The upper decks collapsed like a house of cards, crushing all beneath. Within 20 minutes, the entire structure was on fire. Men watched as their comrades were engulfed in the flames or drowned in the water. The men that survived the initial explosion had two choices. They could either stay on the boat and face the flames, or jump in the water and face drowning and potential hypothermia. And the smart men waited a bit and broke pieces off the boat to float downstream. And Captain Mason was actually seen, he survived the initial explosion, and he was seen on all the different decks throwing pieces off into the men in the water to help them. And Captain Mason would not survive. He went down with the boat and his body was never found. But he was at least helping people, even though he was one of the main causes for this disaster. Now there's the story of this one man who was holding on to the tail of a horse while swimming in the water. And the horse kept swimming towards the flames because it wanted to go near the light. And the man saw a mule floating past, so he grabbed onto the mule and floated all the way down to Memphis with his mule. And for the rest of his life, he said that that was the best horse trade that he has ever made. Now, eventually help did come. A steamer that was on its maiden voyage, it's quite a start, saw the Sultana and was able to rescue 250 men before racing back to Memphis to alert other rescue boats. And by sunrise, the people of Memphis were awakened with the tragedy on a scale that they had never seen before. Now, the city eventually ran out of caskets with the amount of dead bodies that floated down the river, and the injured soldiers took up every available bed in Memphis hospitals. Out of the 750 that were rescued, about a third of them died within a few days, mostly from burns. And between 560 to 70 people survived. There were about 550 ex-prisoners of war that still needed to get home. And the only way to do that was through steamboat, which obviously was not good because they had just gone through this traumatic experience and they had to get on another steamboat to get home. Now, at the time, the Sultana really wasn't included in any newspapers or talked about that much because the nation had just gone through civil war, so the people were accustomed to hearing about death a lot. And President Lincoln's death train was making its way across the country, and that was front page news. Also, the day before the Sultana exploded was the day John Wilkes Booth was found and killed. That was also front page news. So the Sultana was very overshadowed by other events at the time. And history remembers the famous and often doesn't recall the stories of the common man. And there's also an economic reason as to why the Sultana wasn't talked about much. It's because many of the large steamboat companies had good relations with the newspapers, so they did not want this story getting out in fear of people being scared to buy their tickets. Now, a trial was held for this disaster, but nobody was really held accountable for everything. There was a man named Captain George Williams who was sort of a scapegoat in all this. He only faced a few minor charges, but he was definitely not the only one at fault. He was just one cog in the wheel of this whole disaster due to the negligence of many different people, not just him. And one good outcome of this is that the Hartford Steam Boiler Company was formed after this incident to vastly improve and regulate the manufacture of boilers used in steamboats. This was a pressing issue because steamboat accidents were very common during this day, happening one in about every 3 days. So this definitely was something that needed to be changed. And I chose the story of the Sultana for my National History Day project because I felt that I really had never heard about this. Growing up in school, or I never learned about it. And everybody's heard of the Titanic, right? But the Sultana, actually, the loss of life was greater than the Titanic, yet no one has even heard about this. So I thought that it was very important to share this story because the victims were veterans. They were men who did something really good for our country. They survived the horrors of the Civil War, and then they survived the horrible conditions of prisoner of war camps, only to be killed on the way home to the families. So I believe that the least we could do for them is to remember their story and to talk about it. And one of these men was George Anderson, who was my great-great-great-grandfather. And he served for the Union in the Civil War, and he was captured in Alabama and was placed in Cahaba prison. And he was one of the men on the Sultana and was one of the few survivors who made it. And if he didn't survive, I wouldn't be here today to be able to talk about its importance and to tell his story and the story of all the other men and civilians who experienced this horrible disaster. And I'm very grateful that I'm able to share this because it's opened up many opportunities for me. As the Sultana Disaster Museum in Marion, Arkansas recognized my project on their website and on Facebook, and they invited me to their soft opening of their new museum for descendants only. So I'm very excited about that, and it's allowed me to public speak like this. As you can tell, I'm not used to this, but I think that it's opened a lot of great opportunities for me, and I'm really happy that I'm able to share the story of one of my family members and all the other men, because I think that sharing history is so, so important, especially with things like this that aren't talked about as much. So thank you for letting me share.
All right, thank you, Myra, and thank you, Dave. Do we have any questions for the presenters? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just one comment. The 103rd Regiment had 2 soldiers who had been released from Andersonville on the Sultana, and as far as I've been able to tell, they have never been recovered. They're not buried anywhere.
Okay.
As they may be as unknowns, but nobody knows where they are.
What was the total that died?
1,800.
Yes, sir.
What do you plan on doing after high school?
After high school, I definitely want to go to college, and I'm interested in science, so I would study something environmental science or wildlife sciences, but I definitely have a passion for history now. I was thinking into Ohio State or OVU, but yeah, some options.
This isn't a question for the 103rd, but if I wanted to research like my grandparents who were in World War I, is there a good way to find out through the government like where they were stationed, like in Europe?
Come talk to me after tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes,
Okay, got it.
and real quick, the 103rd, that Brannigan ended up down in Atlanta, did they take horses down there? Did they walk? How did they get to Atlanta?
Walk. Yeah. I mean, there were horses as well, but these soldiers walked. That infantry, it was all on their foot, all on foot.
Right down I-75.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am.
Where in Sheffield exactly is the museum?
So it's on Lake Road, East Lake Road in Sheffield Lake.
5501 East
There we
Lake
go.
Road in Sheffield Lake. If you know where they're tearing down the power plant, go west, okay?
So the 103rd has, in the summer, on Sundays, the third Sunday of the month in June, July, August, and September, open house from 1 to 3, and volunteers are there to show you around and explain everything. Bill and I usually camp out on the second floor, help out any way we can. And then you can also call and set up a separate time possibly to come in on our off season as well.
Time for one more.
They have
nice pancake
Yeah.
breakfast a couple times a year.
Okay.
Pancake breakfast is good, twice in the spring, twice in the fall, and best pancakes I've ever had.
All right, and thank you both for coming out site, and before we go,
Thank you.
Myra, this is for you. Thank you. Thank you.